Do you see Android surpassing Apple because they got so many people doing apps and more people designing and so forth? And Apple has their, methodical way.
I can only speak to articles that I've read and a numbers game. So Android is currently invested in all four cell phone companies: T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, and Verizon. Not only are they integrated in all four, so everybody can have access to an Android phone, but they have access to, each company probably carries 10 to 12 different Android phones. So if I walk in and I want a small entry-level Android phone, I can do that. If I want a high-end 4.3-inch screen with an HDMI output Android phone, I can do that. If I want a 4G Android phone, I can do that. If I want an iPhone, I have to go to only Verizon or AT&T, and I have to specifically pick the iPhone of that year that's in stock. So based on numbers, they're just covering more people. So if things stay the same, it's projected, based on studies I've read, by 2015 that Android would be the leading operating system nationwide, or I'm sorry, worldwide, just because they'd be across the board more than Apple. So, but everything can change. I mean, Apple can offer more iPhone or Apple products across, all the different carriers as well, and that would completely change things. But as it stands, just like BlackBerry, you can go to any manufacturer, or I'm sorry, any wireless carrier, you get a BlackBerry. They're all over the place, so it's kind of the same concept.
Speed sometimes is what's the name of the game in our business.
Sure.
Comparing your BlackBerry, your Droid, your iPhone, I know the hardware is the same for them all, but sometimes the software and the throughput and stuff is different.
Sure.
Does one have an advantage over the other?
So as we get into smartphones, especially, and I'm going to talk specifically to Apple and Android, and the reason for that is BlackBerry really hasn't been an internet smartphone in terms of bringing up websites. It's more of a mobile environment. Messaging and email is really what BlackBerry is. Now they're changing their operating system to 6.0, which gives you a much more internet user-friendly experience towards the end of the year, and more smartphones. But specifically to what you're talking about, we're really going to talk about Android and Apple. In terms of 3G, it's going to come down to the hardware itself, right? So you have phones that have dual core processors that are coming out, 1 gigahertz dual core processor. You have 1 gigahertz processors as well. You have 800 megahertz. So if I have an Android phone that has an 800 megahertz processor, and I have an Apple that has a 1 gigahertz processor, even though they're both pulling in 4G, it's just like a computer. The more bigger processor you have, the faster it is. So it really comes down to the processor, not the fact that it's Apple or Android.
Okay, but how about like on a messaging is sent, it travels,
Yeah.
and it's received, and yes, it's great when it gets to you. You can that phone can process it quicker.
Yes.
But the whole system, and it's not just a Verizon system. It's the software behind it along with the hardware. BlackBerry obviously in the early stages had an advantage, but I don't know who does or who will.
Right.
And that's really my question.
Okay, so you're talking about like an email being sent?
Sure.
Okay, so BlackBerry has technology called push technology. So that technology specific to BlackBerry is one of the reasons why typically you get an email on your BlackBerry before it even hits your computer. I don't know the specifics on how they're capable of doing that, but that push capability is specific to BlackBerry. In terms of writing an email on my Android or Apple phone and sending it over, I honestly don't know the specific reason why one would be faster than the other than the phone having a bigger processor than the other and pulling it in, because they're both traveling over the same network. Once it goes out, once you hit that send button, it's the processor that from the phone that's pushing it out, and it's the 3G network or the 4G network that's sending it over to the other person's phone, and then their processor interpreting it. So the only, as a consumer thing I would look at, if that's a concern of yours, is how many gigahertz the actual phone has. It's a dual core processor where it separates applications from the capabilities of the network, which is what a dual core does, or is it an entry-level Android phone where it's just going to give you the applications but at a much slower rate, if that helps.
So saying that, which one's better, the iPhone or?
Well, they both have the same,
Same.
they're both 1 gigahertz at this point. There are going to be Android phones coming out, the Droid Bionic specifically, that'll have a dual core processor, which will differentiate it. There's also going to be Android phones that have a 1.2 gigahertz processor, and who knows what the iPhone 5 will have when it has. But at this point, they're pretty much an even playing field.
As far as, I have an iPhone, and as
Okay.
far as Skype, you know, when I Skype at home on my desktop, I know there's no charge involved.
Mm-hmm.
But I have Skype on my phone,
Yep.
and when I get a call from Skype, it rings.
Mm-hmm.
I know you can buy minutes on your, you know, your normal Skype account, and I don't know what that's all about. And am I paying extra when the phone rings and I Skype through that?
No,
system?
so when the phone rings through Skype, is it a Skype to Skype call?
Yeah,
So there's no charge for that.
okay.
So one of the advantages with Skype is that you're not using the cellular or your minutes when you're communicating. Now, BlackBerry, iPhone, and Android all have something called Skype Mobile, which means that you can have a conversation with Skype without the video, without using your minutes. So, and we'll talk about this when we go into the global capability in more detail, but for example, if you have a friend, family member that's in Europe, and they're on a computer using Skype, and you have a BlackBerry, which clearly doesn't have the video capability, but you have the Skype mobile application, they can Skype call you onto your BlackBerry, and you can have a phone conversation, and neither one of you are paying anything. It's not a long distance call, it's not using your minutes at all. It's just a Skype to Skype call, no different from a computer to computer Skype call.
One thing, just to testify to that, my wife, her family in Lebanon calls her all the time on her phone. It's never cost her a dime.
Oh, okay.
So.
I've never seen it on my bill, so I presumed I wasn't, but I wasn't
Right,
sure, because
right.
I don't do it that often.
Right.
When you're
And-
saying Skype from the iPhone, is that the FaceTime?
No, that's actually a
That's
Skype
different.
application.
Okay.
So the question, I apologize, I have to repeat.
That's all right. I think we're getting it here.
Okay, but yeah, the question was, is Skype different from FaceTime? And yes, it is. Skype and FaceTime are not the only video conferencing applications out there. There's Tango, which is another one. Frame is another one. There's tons of video applications. These are just the more popular applications that more people are familiar with.
And they're all free?
They're all free.
Okay.
Most of them, the ones that I mentioned are free.
Right, okay.
Correct.
It doesn't matter if I'm a Verizon and they're AT&T, it doesn't matter?
Correct.
One question about virus protection.
Sure.
I'm assuming that's starting to become more concern with the smartphones as they're becoming more sophisticated and sort of internet connected.
Honestly, not really. There is an application on Android called Lookout Mobile, and that pretty much looks for viruses and makes sure that any applications that you have are secure. Google themselves have a team specifically dedicated to rogue applications, is what we call, and anytime, real time that there's something that happens, and I don't have any documented cases, but they'll pull it off the market immediately. But with viruses, the people that create these viruses really want to spend the most time on getting information on platforms that are really across the board. Really, they spent the time in my research on Windows computers. That's really where you saw a lot of the challenges. And you don't really see that with Apple products, and that's because the Apple operating system is not nearly as worldwide as your Microsoft products. So for, I guess this is making an opinion, but for somebody that's going to create a virus, they're really going to spend time on an operating system where they can reach the masses. smartphones really haven't reached that. Number one, they don't have nearly as much encrypted information on them as your laptop. And secondly, it's a lot harder to hack into a smartphone through an encrypted wireless signal unless you're using Wi-Fi. So if you're in a Starbucks and you're using Wi-Fi, then your phone is more open. But there haven't been any major documented cases that I've heard where a phone has been hacked like it was in the very early days. Any other questions?
You provided us with a listing here of real estate apps for the Android and the
Yes.
BlackBerry,
Mhm.
but not for the iPhone. Is there a reason for that?
This should be good.
Oh, here's one, it's probably in the, here.
No,
Okay, I just didn't get it.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize there was one.
Okay.
I didn't get one.
No.
Wait, who doesn't have one for the iPhone? Okay.
Yeah, right here.
It's got a purple top. Thanks.
All right, BlackBerry. I need an iPhone.
I need to realize that too.